Hi, I'm Bob. Welcome back to the Solutions to Microeconomics course. We have arrived at Chapter 10, which is about general equilibrium and economic welfare. We will use demand and supply curves to perform multi-market equilibrium analysis. Changes in one market lead to changes in another related market. In the multi-market equilibrium analysis, we consider the direct effects of a shock in one market and the spillover effects in other markets. We will solve the exercises in the first section today. If you find the solution helps, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you. Let's answer exercise 1.1. The demand functions for the only two goods in the economy are Q1 equals 10 minus 2 times P1 plus P2 and Q2 equals 10 minus 2 times P2 plus P1. Society has 5 units of each good. Solve for the equilibrium P1, P2, Q1, and Q2. We have the equilibrium quantities of the two goods. We have two equations for two unknowns. We can solve for the equilibrium prices of the two goods. Let's solve exercise 1.2. The demand functions for each of the two goods depend on the prices of the goods, P1 and P2. Q1 equals 15 minus 3 times P1 plus P2, and Q2 equals 6 minus 2 times P2 plus P1. However, each supply curve depends only on its own price. Q1 equals 2 plus P1, and Q2 equals 1 plus P2. Solve for the equilibrium P1, P2, Q1, and Q2. In the market equilibrium, the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied for each good. Then we have two equations for two unknowns. We can solve for the equilibrium prices for good 1 and good 2. Substituting the prices into supply or demand functions gives the equilibrium quantities of the goods. Let's see exercise 1.3. The market demand for medical checkups per day is as follows, where NC is the number of patients per day who are at least 40 years old, and PF is the price of a checkup. The market demand for the number of dental checkups per day, QT, is as follows, where PT represents the price of a dental checkup. The long-run market supply of medical checkups is QF equals 50 times PF minus 10 times PT. The long-run market supply of dentists is QT equals 50 times PT minus 10 times PF. The supplies are linked because people decide on a medical and dental career based in part on relative earnings. In part A, if NC equals 40,000, what is the equilibrium number of medical and dental checkups? What are the equilibrium prices? How would an increase in NC affect the equilibrium prices? Determine dPF over dNC and dPT over dNC. We have 4 equations, 2 for demand and 2 for supply. In equilibrium, quantity demanded equals quantity supplied in each market. Then we have two equations for the two unknown prices. We can solve for the prices. Plugging the price into demand or supply functions gives the equilibrium quantities of medical and dental checkups. They are functions of NC, the number of patients per day who are at least 40 years old. If it equals 40,000, we can calculate the values of the equilibrium prices and quantities. We can also obtain the derivative of the prices with respect to NC. I skip parts B and C because I don't understand the questions. Let's find answers to exercise 1.4. The demand curves in sector 1 of the labor market is L1 equals A minus B times W. The demand curve in sector 2 is L2 equals C minus D times W. The supply curve of labor for the entire market is L equals E plus F times W. In equilibrium, L1 plus L2 equals L. In part A, solve for the equilibrium with no minimum wage. In the market equilibrium, labor supplied equals labor demanded. It gives the equilibrium wage, hours of work in each sector, and the total hours worked. In part B, solve for the equilibrium at which the minimum wage is W underscore in sector 1 only. Suppose the minimum wage W underscore in sector 1 is above the equilibrium wage. Sector 1 demands L1D hours of work. We can write the total labor demand function. The wage in sector 2 is W. In equilibrium, the labor demanded equals the labor supplied. We can solve for the equilibrium wage in sector 2, W. Substituting it into the demand or supply functions gives the labor equilibrium quantity in sector 2 and the total labor quantity. In part C, solve for the equilibrium at which the minimum wage W underscore applies to the entire labor market. If the minimum wage applies to the entire labor market, the equilibrium quantities of hours of work in each sector are determined by the minimum wage using the demand functions. The total quantity of labor is also determined by the minimum wage. Let's solve exercise 1.5. Philadelphia collects an ad valorem tax of 3.928% on its residents' earnings, unlike the surrounding areas. Show the effect of this tax on the equilibrium wage, total employment in Philadelphia, and employment in the surrounding areas. The earnings tax shifts the labor supply curve to the left in Philadelphia because fewer people are willing to provide hours of work at each level of wage. We solve the problem in 4 steps. In the first step, we determine the original equilibrium. The total supply curve S1 is the horizontal sum of the labor supply curves in the covered and uncovered areas SC1 and SU. The covered area is Philadelphia, and the uncovered area is the surrounding area. The intersection of the total labor supply S1 and the labor demand determines the original equilibrium E1, where the wage is W1, employment in Philadelphia is LC1, employment in surrounding areas is LU1, and total employment is L1 equal to LC1 plus LU1. In the second step, we show the shift in the supply curve in Philadelphia and the resulting shift in the total supply curve. The wage tax reduces the labor supply for each level of wage, and the labor supply curve in the covered area, Philadelphia, shifts to the left from SC1 to SC2. As a result, the total labor supply shifts to the left from S1 to S2. In the third step, we determine the new equilibrium. The new labor supply S2 intersects the demand curve at E2, where the equilibrium wage rises to W2, and the equilibrium employment falls to L2. In the covered area, Philadelphia, the employment falls to LC2. In the uncovered surrounding areas, the employment increases to LU2. In the fourth step, we compare the equilibria. The wage tax in Philadelphia causes total employment and employment in the covered area, Philadelphia, to fall. It causes the equilibrium wage and employment in uncovered surrounding areas to rise. Let's go to exercise 1.6. What is the effect of a subsidy of S per hour on labor in only one sector of the economy on the equilibrium wage, total employment, and employment in the covered and uncovered sectors? Suppose the labor market consists of two sectors, and the subsidy is given to the firms in sector 1. It shifts the labor demand curve to the right because firms employ more workers at each wage level with the subsidy. We follow the 4 steps to solve the problem. In the first step, we determine the original equilibrium. The total labor demand curve, D1, is the horizontal sum of the demand curves in the covered and uncovered sectors, DC1 plus DU. The original market equilibrium E1 is determined by the intersection of the total demand curve D1 and the total supply curve S. The equilibrium wage is W1, and the equilibrium total employment is L1. It is the sum of the employment in the covered sector, LC1, and the employment in the uncovered sector, LU1. In the second step, we show the shift in the demand for labor in the covered sector and the resulting shift in the total labor demand curve. The subsidy to the firms shifts the labor demand curve to the right from DC1 to DC2 in the covered sector because firms are willing to hire more workers at each wage level with the subsidy. The total labor demand curve is the horizontal sum of the demand curves in the two sectors, so it also shifts to the right from D1 to D2. In the third step, we determine the equilibrium wage using the new total supply and demand curves, and then determine employment in the two sectors. The new labor demand curve D2 and the labor supply curve S determine the new market equilibrium E2, where the equilibrium wage rises to W2, and the market equilibrium total employment rises to L2. Workers shift between the two sectors. In the covered sector, employment rises to LC2, mainly because of the subsidy. In the uncovered sector, employment falls to LU2 because of the higher wage. In the fourth step, we compare the equilibria. The subsidy causes the equilibrium wage to rise. It also causes employment in the covered sector and total employment to rise. The total employment increases, but in a smaller size than in the covered sector because employment in the uncovered sector falls. Let's answer exercise 1.7. Suppose that the government gives a fixed subsidy of T per firm in one sector of the economy to encourage firms to hire more workers. What is the effect on the equilibrium wage, total employment, and employment in the covered and uncovered sectors? It is the same as exercise 1.6. We can solve it in 4 steps. You can give it a try. In conclusion, the subsidy in one sector increases the equilibrium wage, employment in the covered sector, and total employment. The total employment increase is smaller than that in the covered sector because employment in the uncovered sector falls. Let's solve exercise 1.8. Competitive firms in Africa sell their output only in Europe and the United States. The industry's supply curve is upward sloping. Europe puts a tariff of T per unit on the good, but the United States does not. What is the effect of the tariff on the total quantity of the goods sold? The quantity sold in Europe, the quantity sold in the United States, and the equilibrium price. We solve the problem in 4 steps. In the first step, we determine the market equilibrium without tariffs. The market equilibrium without tariffs, E1, is determined by the intersection of the total supply curve S1 and the demand curve D. The total supply curve S1 is the horizontal sum of the supply curve in Europe as C1 and the supply curve in the United States as U. The market equilibrium price is P1 and the equilibrium quantity is Q1. Q1 is the sum of the quantities in the two markets, QC1 in Europe and QU1 in the United States. In the second step, we show the shift in the supply curve in the covered area, Europe, and the resulting shift in the total supply curve. The tariff in the European market shifts the supply curve upward from SC1 to SC2 because the cost of products rises. As a result, the total supply curve also shifts upward from S1 to S2. In the third step, we determine the equilibrium with tariffs in the European market. The new supply curve S2 and the demand curve D determine the new equilibrium E2, where the equilibrium price rises to P2 and the equilibrium quantity falls to Q2. The changes in the amounts of the products sold in the European and the United States markets are different. The equilibrium quantity sold in the European market falls to QC2, while the quantity sold in the United States market rises to QU2. In the fourth step, we compare the equilibria. The tariff in the European market raises the equilibrium price of the product and lowers the equilibrium total quantity sold. But the reduction in the total quantity is smaller than that in the covered area of Europe because the sales in the United States go up. Thank you so much for solving all the problems with me today. See you soon in the next section of the chapter. Take care. Thank you for watching this video and subscribing to my YouTube channel. See you next time.